Hello everyone, this is Marathon Films here with my first movie review ever on the 2005 remake of King Kong by Peter Jackson. Now, this film was released December 14th, 2005, and it was a direct remake of the original 1933 film King Kong by Marion C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schoedsack. And this film also stars Naomi Watts, Jack Black, and Adrian Brody. And when this film was released, the opening weekend, it was the number one its opening weekend, and it made $21,259,000 on an opening weekend, and then later on, as it was released worldwide, it made 550,357,357 That includes domestic and foreign releases. And what the movie is about is this group of three separate people in New York. You know, Fay Wray is the original actress, but Ann Darrow, who is played by Naomi Watts, was during the Great Depression era actress who lost her job as an actress and is trying to find a job, or hence during the Great Depression era in New York City. And there's Carl Denham, who is played by Jack Black, who finds a map of an uncharted island and wants to go there and make his next film, because he's on the brink of being fired from his job as a director with the movie studio, some fictional movie studio. And so they meet up near a carryout store, kind of like the original 1933 film, where she steals an apple and she gets caught, and then he pays the tender money and so forth, and they meet and talk about a movie that he's going to be shooting supposedly off the coast of somewhere in the Atlantic, but then later it goes into, for some reason, the Pacific Ocean. Don't know why. That's how it is. And then later we meet Jack Driscoll, who is played by Adrian Brody, who is the scriptwriter for Carl Denham, and just gets stuck on the voyage on the way to this island. Now, on the way to this island, it's like an hour and a half long on the ship. There's everyone meeting each other. There's romantic tension between Jack Driscoll and Ann Darrow on the ship, and I just think it's like an hour and a half not necessary even though they want to show romance and drama, it's not really that necessary in a film like this, hence King Kong. So they arrive on the island, crash on it, I should say, on the rocks, on the rock wall, and they land on the island, and they go to film the ruins of the city, and then they encounter a lost civilization of natives who are very scared, because once Ann Darrow yells, then King Kong's roar is heard in the distance, and then you hear the natives shield themselves and say, "Kong, Kong, Kong." And what King Kong is basically their god. So with seeing Ann Darrow, they take her and sacrifice to King Kong. And then the crew notices later on, as they are about to escape Skull Island, that Ann Darrow is gone. They have to turn back. So a group of men get on their boats, get their guns, and get whatever is needed, food, ammunition, and go save Ann. Now, when they arrive in the island and they go into the actual jungle, they encounter many, many, many creatures. Like, they encounter a Triceratops-like creature at the beginning, which is in a deleted scene. They encounter a Brontosaurus, and hence they get stuck in a Brontosaurus stampede because the dinosaurs are being chased by these Vastosauruses, which I kind of think they look like velociraptors. And they lose 5 of their men, and then they later climb up this like mud pile and manage to escape. And in a deleted scene, they go across a river, and while they're going across the river, they get attacked by another creature, an underwater creature. It looks like a toss between an eel and a like scary almost like Frankenfish almost. and they lose all their guns, they lose all their weapons, their ammunition, and well, most of it. They still, for some reason, next scene they have them for some odd reason, movie magic. And then as that's happening, King Kong goes and takes a break with Anne and takes her to his somewhat lair. And while he's there, like eating like bamboo and whatnot, he finds that Anne's trying to escape. And then while Anne is trying to escape, she starts to entertain him because she is part of a ballet ballroom quartet dance. So then the gorilla is happy and then is excited, and then he leaves her alone and she's trying to escape, trying to find Jack, Carl Denham, and the rest of the crew member. But we cut to a scene where is most famous in the 70s version, and the 30s version of King Kong is the log scene, the log chasm. Now that is a very iconic scene for many film goers, cinematographers, and many film buffs that know about King Kong. Like you don't know King Kong without that log scene. So they managed to go across a little bit further the log, but then they encounter King Kong, and then he stops them from pursuing and shakes them off the log, just like in the original movie. And in the 70s version, he shakes them off the log. Some survive and go through a deep chasm underneath. So then we go back to Anne, running away, and then all of a sudden she encounters a crocodile-like creature that's feasting on a dead carcass, and she ends up trying to escape, and then, she escapes the animal, and then the animal gets eaten, and we don't know what this animal, that attacked this crocodile-like creature is against, and so she's afraid that what's going on out there. Bugs start crawling on her, and she escapes, and then we notice then it's a Vastosaurus Rex, a co-evolution thing of a T-Rex. So she gets chased by the T-Rex and she escapes this first one, not knowing that right the Pasire is the second one, and then she almost dies, and then as soon as she screams, Kong comes and a big fight ensues, which is a very cool scene, where he fights not only two, but he fights three. So I believe it's a family of V-Rexes that he fights. So the CGI in that and everything is just brilliant, and I'll get back to the CGI later. And so once Kong defeats the first two, he's got one more left. And what's fascinating about that scene is it's almost like a shot-for-shot direct, like almost exact replica of the original fight in the 1933 version. And it's just it's almost got the same feeling, got the same like texture, like, oh, I want to see the original film after this one. Like, that's what the feeling is. So then Kong destroys the dinosaur, he takes Anne to his lair, and all the crewmen are awoken and startled by these big bug creatures that come out of these caves and whatnot, and these slugs like come out of nowhere and attack many of the crewmen. And as they are about to escape, more and more show up, but then they get help from the crew members from the ship, and they save the day, and they come out of the chasm and start heading back, except for Jack, who says that Anne is still alive and is going to save her and is going to find her and take her back to the ship, as hence the crew is about ready to leave. So he makes it up to the lair, and then as he gets there, chaos consumes. Like, Kong is woken up by him reaching for her. He tries to attack him, and then there's these big bat-like creatures flying around, eating at Kong, and distracting him as Anne and Jack are trying to get out of that cave. They manage to take flight of one of the bat-like creatures and fall into the river, and then start running to the wall that they originally started at. But hence Kong is right on their heels, and as soon as they exit the jungle and meet the crew members, they notice that they're ready to attack Kong, and take him prisoner because Carl Denham, with his film equipment, lost all the film, lost everything. So the only way to get his money's worth is by taking King Kong back to New York. So as they attack him, Anne is like, stop, leave him alone. And then, once she goes away and heads back to one of the sailboats, Kong is infuriated. He gets really, really angry and kills almost all of the men that take him down, as well as on his way there, some stop and try to delay him, where this does not work. And as he pursues them, he kills most of them in the sailboats. And then as soon as that happens, Carl Denham throws a bottle of chloroform on the gorilla's face and sort of keeps him asleep for a while. And then he says, as from the original film, and I quote the famous quote, "We're millionaires, boys. I'll share it with all of you. In a few months, lights will be up on Broadway. Kong, the Eighth Wonder of the World," which is a homage to the original film. So once they get back to New York, Kong is being displayed in front of everyone at a Broadway theater. But then, as the original film, he escapes because supposedly the chains are chrome steel, but he manages to break free of them, and he manages to be loose on the streets, causing havoc, chaos, destroying cars, buses, trams, and so forth. And then he chases Jack in a cab, and then once he startles Jack, and Jack sort of like falls asleep because of the impact Kong made on the cab, him and Anne meet, and then they go to Central Park, where during the time it's Christmas time, there's snow, there's ice on the ground, they're having a good time, and then the military sees them and then starts firing on Kong. So that startles Kong, and he escapes and runs for his life with Anne, and then he ends up climbing back then the tallest building in New York, the Empire State Building. And hence, once he gets up there, he encounters biplanes which shoot him down and kill him, which then at the end is that iconic line that is told is, "It wasn't the airplanes, it was Beauty who killed the Beast," which is interesting trivia because that was meant to go to Fay Wray during the time that production was going forth of this film. But Fay Wray died in August of 2004, so with that, it wasn't able to happen, so it ended up going to Jack Black, Carl Denham. So when this film was made, opening weekend, it was the #1 film during December 15th through the 17th, I believe, 2005. It made $21,259,000, and then later on, when it was being screened, it ended up making $550,517,357. At that time, that was big, and that was including domestic and foreign. And it also did later won 3 Academy Awards for Best Sound Mixing, Best Sound Editing, and Best Visual Effects. And what I mean by best special effects is when you look at the creatures and you look at the King Kong, everything's CGI. Everything is special effects. For Kong, it was Andy Serkis was doing the digital CGI of King Kong. And what they did was they put like little like, I call them like polka dots things all through on his face, all through his body, and every movement he made was what King Kong would do. So that's how they got King Kong in real life, was stop motion animate. Well, not stop motion, but animation, but stop motion itself. So as well as during that time, many of the characters were being digitalized, and they had like digital images, copies of themselves in the film, so that when actors were being tossed around, they leapt, they died, or they fall, or or they were being carried or being eaten by dinosaurs or by Kong, they were all digital. Like you can't really see it from a distance, but if you really look close, when Kong eats the guy right before the sailboats, or on the V-Rex, or the log chasm scene in the ravine, they're all digital characters when they're attacked. And as well as for the New York scene, everything in New York was in a soundstage in New Zealand and Weta Workshop that Peter Jackson works for. And so everything was green screen of 1930s New York during the Great Depression. So, as well as being on top of the Empire State Building when Anne is looking at Kong at the camera, it's actually she's on a green fingers and a green screen all behind her. So it was all that New York, like the top of the Empire State Building, all green screen. And what was interesting is all that was shot even way before the film, because what Peter Jackson did was he went on top of the Empire State Building, and I mean the tip top, like all the way to the roof, right below the antenna, and just recorded the skyline of New York City during, I think it was 2004. And that's how he ended up tried to render some of that skyline to the 1930s skyline. So this was besides Lord of the Rings, which was his trilogy before this, and Hobbit came right after this. This was his only standalone film that he did, and he really wanted to do, because what got him into his film career was his first movie he was ever exposed to was the original 1933 King Kong, which got him in the films, and he said one day he wanted to make a remake of King Kong. So, and he had this in mind since the 70s, the 80s, and even then during the 70s there was a big concern about the rights of King Kong, because Marion C. Cooper said that King Kong is his rights, it's not RKO's, it's not, Universal was having debate about it, Paramount was having debate about it, because the 70s remake was Paramount shoot, I forgot his name, Dino De Laurentiis, and there was a big uproar about that, so that's why Peter Jackson was not involved with that. But then later on, in the mid-90s, he had a script ready for this film. Like during the 1996, he had a script ready to go for the remake of King Kong. And during the time Universal had the rights, and they gave him the go because they wanted to do other monster movies, but they stopped it in 96, and I think it was until 2003-04 when they got the go, because in 96 they had another gorilla movie, Mighty Joe Young, that Disney remade, another gorilla remake of the 49 movie Mighty Joe Young, and Sony did a remake of Godzilla in 1998. I'm not going to get into that. So a giant monster in New York. So that's why they put a hold on King Kong. And so my thoughts on this film is, when I was 5, it came out in 2005, I was 7 years old. I went to see this with my family, and it was a great film. I loved it. The CGI was great. Again, I was 7. I didn't know much about it, but it's just I love that film because when I was little, I loved dinosaurs. I loved watching the original King Kong. I loved the 70s King Kong, and I'm like, my parents took me to see this, and it was great. And then later on, I got the DVD, and then I'm like, I wonder how they made the CGI. So I got the Blu-ray editions. I got this because it's an extended version. It's got 13 hours of bonus content, which I highly recommend, because it talks about everything they did, 3 hours of how they recreated the movie, how they came up with it, what they planned on doing, and the CGI and so forth. So then I got this film, and there also was deleted scenes in here. And it also shows, like, you know, history of Skull Island, like a fictional history. And then it talks about New York during 1933, during the Great Depression. Shows, like, the pre-visual effects that were used to show the characters what they were going to do, what they are going to do against the dinosaurs, and, you know, what King Kong and T-Rex fight. So, many special effects, like, content in here and everything like that. I also got this copy because of the banner I got of 2012. Universal was celebrating like 100 years, and I love these slipcovers. So I got King Kong, and it came with little interesting factoids about the studio during the time and the timeline of their key films during the years, and some just the poster and the snippet. It was just cool to have in my collection. So, my thoughts on King Kong. It is a great film. It has some of that texture in it that's like, you just have a moment thinking like, huh, I want to watch the original film, the original 1933 black and white film. Because when you see both of them side by side, it's like, oh yeah, when you watch this, it's like, oh yeah, I know that from if you've seen the original film, you're like, oh yeah, I know that from that film. I know that from this film. I see where they're referencing the original film. You know, they make remarks about, you know, Cooper, Schoedsack, and then they make, you know, shots from the original film on this film. So it's like, I would say watch this film, because this film itself may not be as good as like the original film, but it's 3 hours worth of a good time, hence the hour and a half being on the ship, you know, the drama, the romance. It's just, if they would have put an extra hour and a half of being on the island or being in New York, that would be great. But again, King Kong is worth seeing once in your life, and if you're a big, huge film buff or a cinematographer like I am, and it's just worth like getting the extended editions, because it's just worth it. So, and what this movie did influence later on was that it helped Peter Jackson tremendously with his career, and not to mention his Hobbit series, and what also it helped Universal Studios as well, because during 2008 there was a huge backlot fire that destroyed the King Kong Confrontation ride. So during that time, they were like, they didn't want to rebuild it. They lost their most famous attraction in a fire. So then they're like, why don't we make a ride based off of the 2005 film? So in 2010, they opened the King Kong 360 3D attraction, which I've been on myself, which is really, really cool. It's a 3D ride, part of the Universal tour that you take, and you're on Skull Island in a 3D world. And that's the big influence that this movie had made for the studio. So it has also made a lot of impact on many other filmmakers as well, and you know, famous directors like Spielberg and Lucas, and you know, obviously Jackson, have made remarks about how great this film is. And this film was one of the reasons like I got into cinematography too, and I just glad I have it, because it's just a great example of CGI, special effects, editing, and sound, and so forth. Because all of that is just, all that, the sound, the editing of the dinosaurs roaring and Kong roaring, it really blows your mind and hits you in the chest. It really scares you. So, yeah, that is my review on King Kong 2005 by Peter Jackson. Again, this is my first review, so please leave a comment. Tell me what you think about King Kong. Leave me a comment, you know, subscribe to my channel, like my channel, and please just comment and see is there anything I need to work on, because this is my first review. So again, this is Marathon Films saying that please like and subscribe.